On December 12, 1809, in the arid mountains surrounding the city of Guanajuato, something happened inside the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows, something the colonial authorities tried to erase from history for more than 2 centuries. That night, 15 nuns vanished without a trace. The only things they left behind were their neatly folded habits placed on each bed, and strange symbols carved into the stone walls, etched with their own bloodied fingernails. The official records were burned. Witnesses were silenced. And for 214 years, no one dared to speak of what really happened in those frozen mountains. Until now. Because the documents I found in the secret archive of the Archbishopric reveal a truth so disturbing, it becomes clear why both the Church and the Spanish Crown decided to bury it forever. But before I continue with this story that will change everything you thought you knew about colonial Mexico, I must warn you, this is not just any tale. This kind of content is only for the bravest listeners, those willing to uncover secrets hidden for centuries. If you already feel a chill running down your spine, give this story your full attention, because what you're about to hear has never been told anywhere else. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows rose like a fortress of volcanic stone, perched high in the Sierra de Guanajuato, 3 leagues away from the royal road that led to the silver mines. It was built in 1687 with the blood-stained gold of Don Sebastián Montemayor, a wealthy miner whose cruelty toward the indigenous workers had already become legend. The convent was home to 15 barefoot Carmelite nuns from the region's most prominent families. The very structure of the convent was unsettling. Its black volcanic stone walls absorbed every sound from the outside world, creating an unnatural silence that weighed upon visitors like a tombstone. The corridors were unusually long and narrow, designed according to strange blueprints that Don Sebastián had supposedly found among the ruins of pre-Hispanic temples destroyed to build the convent. The Mother Superior, Sister Maria Esperanza Villanueva y Mendoza, was a 42-year-old woman whose personal story was wrapped in both mystery and tragedy. She was the legitimate daughter of the Count of Valenciana, and before she took her vows at age 25, she had been considered the most beautiful woman in Guanajuato. But on the very night before her wedding, her fiancé, the young Captain Rodrigo de Santa Maria, died under bizarre circumstances. They found him in his chamber, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. There were no visible wounds, yet his hair had turned completely white overnight, and his eyes were bloodshot. Doctors declared he had died of sheer fright, but they could never explain what he might have seen to produce such horror. Exactly 7 days after his funeral, Sister Maria Esperanza entered the convent. She brought with her a dowry so generous that it not only completed the convent's construction, but also funded the largest library in all of New Spain, more than 3,000 volumes on theology, philosophy, and astronomy. Yet among them were also texts far older and far more disturbing, manuscripts written in languages the Inquisition had officially banned. The other nuns, though from equally prestigious families, shared one haunting trait: each had joined the convent after suffering inexplicable family tragedies. The Mendoza twins had lost all 6 of their brothers in a span of only 3 months, each death the result of strange accidents. Sister Remedios Herrera entered after her entire family died in a peculiar epidemic that struck only their household. And the youngest, Sister Paloma Sandoval, barely 19 years old, arrived tormented by visions. She saw impossible places, people speaking languages that had never existed, and rituals performed in underground chambers bathed in a greenish light that cast no shadows. The convent operated with a disturbing mechanical precision. At 4 in the morning, the bronze bell summoned the sisters to lauds. But its sound was strange. Rather than the usual metallic chime, it produced a deep, resonant tone that seemed to rise from the very entrails of the earth. Every schedule was followed with mathematical exactness, yet there was something unnatural in how synchronized the nuns seemed. Their cells were cruelly austere. A wooden bed without a mattress. A black iron crucifix. A kneeler made of volcanic stone. And a barred window looking out toward the gardens. In those gardens, the sisters cultivated medicinal herbs, but the herbs had uncanny effects. They cured illnesses with miraculous efficiency, yet those who consumed them reported dreams of impossible landscapes and conversations with beings whose names were not human. Even more unsettling were the convent's architectural inconsistencies, noticed only by the most observant visitors. The official blueprints showed a simple structure, but those who walked its halls counted more cells than existed on the plans. They stumbled upon corridors that were never drawn, and even staircases leading downward into levels that officially did not exist. Travelers who passed by at night told whispered stories that had been handed down for generations. Strange lights moving in perfect geometric patterns. Chants that didn't sound entirely Christian. And silhouettes at the windows making movements that matched no prayer ever known. And there was another detail never officially recorded. Every 7 years, without fail, one of the nuns would suddenly fall ill with a mysterious affliction. According to the official story, she would be sent back to Spain for treatment. But the port records of Veracruz never showed any passages for these sisters. And Spanish convents never confirmed receiving them. Over the convent's 122 years of existence, 17 nuns had disappeared this way, always in December, always without a trace, and always after showing the same symptoms, sleepwalking, visions, and the compulsive urge to carve strange symbols into the walls. The sequence of events that would culminate in the mass disappearance of December 12, 1809, began exactly 14 days earlier. It all began on November 28, during evening prayers. Sister Paloma Sandoval suddenly collapsed before the main altar. But it was no ordinary fainting spell. Her body arched backward at an anatomically impossible angle, remaining suspended like that for exactly 3 minutes, while from her mouth came a sound none of the witnesses could ever properly describe. In her personal diary, Sister Remedios wrote, "It was not a human scream, nor the roar of a beast, nor the whistling of the wind among the rocks. It was something that seemed to come from a place outside our world. A sound that made my bones vibrate, as if they were the strings of an instrument played by invisible hands." When Paloma finally recovered, the sisters noticed a series of symbols engraved on her forearms, marks no one recognized. They were not cuts, nor wounds made by any instrument, but lines that seemed to have emerged from inside her skin, like ink that had suddenly risen to the surface. The symbols formed complex geometric patterns, concentric circles intertwined with serpentine lines, figures resembling lunar phases, yet in sequences that matched no known calendar. There were even glyphs that vaguely resembled hieroglyphics, but arranged in a structure belonging to no catalogued civilization. The most respected physician of Guanajuato, Dr. Melchor Vasquez de la Cadena, was summoned in haste. His report, still preserved in the Archbishop's medical archives, is deeply disturbing. He wrote, "The patient's skin shows no signs of incision, cauterization, or trauma. The marks are not superficial, they are embedded at the dermal level, as though imprinted from within the body. Stranger still, the symbols emit a perceptible heat to the touch and pulse with a rhythm independent from the patient's heartbeat. But the physical symptoms were only the beginning of something far darker." In the days that followed, Sister Paloma began to display knowledge she had never possessed. This young woman, who barely knew basic Latin, suddenly started writing complex treatises of astronomy in classical Nahuatl, a language systematically suppressed in the region for over a century. She calculated with precision the movements of constellations invisible from the northern hemisphere. She described ancient lunar rituals that predated the arrival of the Spaniards by millennia. She even drew detailed maps of underground chambers which, she insisted, lay directly beneath the convent. Most disturbing of all, Paloma claimed no memory of writing these texts. Each morning, she awoke to find pages and pages of notes on her desk, all in her own handwriting but in languages she did not understand. "It is as if my hands write while I sleep," she confessed to Mother Esperanza. "But the words describe places I see in dreams, dreams so vivid they feel more real than this very room where we sit." On December 3rd, exactly 1 week after the first episode, the phenomenon intensified dramatically. Sister Paloma began sleepwalking, but it was no ordinary somnambulism. The other nuns found her in places she could not possibly have reached. Standing atop the chapel dome, 30 meters above the ground, with no ladders or ropes to explain her presence. Inside the crypt, where the remains of the founding sisters were kept, despite the iron door being locked and her having no key. Or simply facing the solid stone walls, scratching them with her fingernails until they bled, while whispering in a tongue that seemed older than all known human languages. In her diary, Sister Remedios described it with trembling handwriting. What comes from her mouth in those moments is not the word of God. They are sounds that crawl under the skin, making me dream of places I have never seen, of rituals no servant of Christ should ever know. When I hear her speak that impossible language, I feel as if something inside me understands perfectly, though my conscious mind cannot translate a single word. But the most terrifying part was that Paloma's condition began spreading to the rest of the convent. On December 5th, one of the Mendoza twins awoke with similar symbols engraved on her palms. On December 6th, Sister Remedios herself was found at dawn, digging frantically with her bare hands in the convent garden, trying to open a tunnel into the earth. On December 7th, 3 more nuns developed the same compulsion, spending hours feverishly carving symbols into their cell walls until their fingers bled. The pattern was now undeniable. What had begun as an isolated phenomenon was spreading like a contagion, but it wasn't any ordinary disease. It was awakening hidden knowledge and impulses, as if something buried deep within their minds had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Mother Esperanza, desperate and horrified, sent urgent messages to the Bishop of Guanajuato. She begged for the presence of an exorcist, a doctor specialized in mental illness, or any ecclesiastical authority capable of explaining, or halting, what was happening in her convent. But the replies she received were evasive. The bishop claimed to be preoccupied with pressing matters in the capital. Exorcists were busy in other dioceses. The doctors insisted it was a matter of faith, beyond their jurisdiction. It was as if the church authorities were deliberately avoiding involvement in what was unfolding at Our Lady of Sorrows. And indeed, there was a reason for this silence, one that went back to the very foundation of the convent more than a century earlier. Because what was happening in December of 1809 was not an accident, but the culmination of a cycle that had been repeating itself every 7 years for more than 100 years. To truly understand the events of 1809, we must go back 122 years earlier, to the winter of 1687, the year Don Sebastián Montemayor made a decision that would condemn generations of nuns to a fate far worse than death. Don Sebastián was not a religious man. He was a ruthless and pragmatic miner, whose only true devotion lay in the silver he extracted from the mountains of Guanajuato. He had amassed his fortune by mercilessly exploiting indigenous workers, imposing impossible quotas and punishing failure with such cruelty that even by colonial standards, his methods were infamous. So, why would such a man build a convent? The answer was not redemption. It was calculation. A chilling calculation he made after discovering something in the depths of his mind that changed his understanding of reality itself. While digging a new tunnel in the deepest vein of the Valenciana mine, workers broke into a natural chamber, one that appeared in no geological maps of the region. The chamber was a perfect circle, carved into living rock with a precision no tool of the pre-Hispanic world could have achieved. Its walls were covered in inscriptions written in no known language, neither Nahuatl, nor Otomi, nor Purapeca, nor anything ever catalogued by missionary scholars. But the most disturbing detail lay at the chamber's center, a black obsidian altar of flawless geometric dimensions, surrounded by 13 niches carved into the walls. Each niche was clearly designed to hold a human body in an upright position. And the niches were not empty. Inside them stood the mummified remains of 13 young women, their bodies preserved naturally by the chamber's unique conditions. They wore robes woven from a textile unlike anything known in Mesoamerica. Far from being horrified, Don Sebastián saw in this discovery an opportunity. For weeks, he obsessively studied the chamber's inscriptions with the help of an indigenous translator, one who had once read ancient codices before his forced conversion to Christianity. What they deciphered was a complete cosmology, detailed instructions for rituals designed to communicate with entities dwelling in realities parallel to our own. The chamber, they learned, had been used for centuries by an order of priestesses devoted to the worship of a being they called the Mother of the Depths. This entity fed on spiritual devotion, offering in exchange forbidden knowledge and temporal power. At the core of their cult was a ritual requiring 13 maidens. Through a gradual process of spiritual transformation, these maidens became anchors, vessels that allowed the entity to manifest physically in our world. But Don Sebastián grasped something the ancient priestesses never had. If the ritual were disguised within the structure of Christianity, the entity could draw not only on the devotion of a chosen few, but on the faith of an entire community. Its power would multiply exponentially. His plan was chillingly simple. He would build a Christian convent directly above the ancient chamber, filling it with nuns from the most devout families of the region. The convent's seemingly orthodox prayers would serve as a facade for a hybrid cult, one that fused Christian forms with the pre-Hispanic rites carved into the stone. And every 7 years, according to the chamber's astronomical calculations, one of the nuns would be chosen to join the 13 ancestral guardians. To ensure the success of his plan, Don Sebastián did not merely finance the convent, he arranged for his own daughter, Maria Esperanza, to eventually become its mother superior. But what he did not anticipate was that his daughter would develop a much deeper understanding of the forces he had unleashed, and that she would subtly alter the ancient ritual itself. The convent's first years seemed uneventful on the surface. But fragments of records that survived a mysterious fire in 1734 reveal a disturbing pattern already at work. Every 7 years, without fail, one nun would begin to show strange symptoms. Sleepwalking, visions, inexplicable knowledge of ancient languages, and the compulsive urge to carve symbols into her cell walls. The process always lasted exactly 14 days. Then, the nun would vanish during the night, leaving only a handwritten letter behind. In the letters, each woman explained she had been called by God to a special mission in distant lands. These explanations satisfied both civil and ecclesiastical authorities, who were too busy with the political and economic concerns of New Spain to question what seemed like a prosperous, Orthodox convent. But the true causes of these disappearances were preserved in secret diaries, written by successive mothers superior in a cipher that combined ecclesiastical Latin with symbols borrowed from the underground chamber. Centuries later, in 1987, these diaries were discovered during restoration work in Guanajuato's cathedral. They were deciphered by Jesuit linguist Father Antonio Mendizabal, who found the key to the code in documents hidden deep within the Vatican's secret archives. What he uncovered was a 122-year chronicle of hybrid rituals that gradually transformed the convent into something that outwardly resembled Christianity, yet served much older, darker purposes. The diaries revealed that every 7 years, the entity known as the Mother of the Depths would slowly take hold of one chosen nun, transforming her until something wholly different inhabited her body. These women did not die in the usual sense. Instead, they joined the 13 ancestral guardians in the underground chamber, expanding the entity's power and preparing the way for its full manifestation in our world. But the diaries noted something else. With growing concern, each 7-year cycle strengthened the entity's influence not just over the chosen nun, but over the entire convent. Those who remained developed strange abilities and knowledge far beyond their Christian education. They understood languages they had never studied, predicted astronomical events with impossible precision, and intuitively grasped mathematical and geometric principles that European science had not yet discovered. By 1794, 15 years before the mass disappearance, Mother Superior Sister Constanza de la Trinidad wrote an especially chilling entry. The power of Our Lady of the Depths has grown beyond what our predecessors could have imagined. She no longer requires a single servant every 7 years. She may now speak through us all when she desires, and our bodies answer her will like instruments perfectly tuned. I fear we approach the moment the ancient texts describe as the final convergence, when all guardians will unite to open the gate between worlds forever. Thus, the events of 1809 were not an aberration. They were the natural culmination of a cycle that had been unfolding for more than a century. The year was 1809, and the convent cycle was reaching its most dangerous stage. The entity had gathered enough power to attempt something far greater than an individual transformation, the simultaneous conversion of all 15 nuns into a collective body that would allow it to manifest permanently in our world. But fate introduced an unforeseen factor, one neither the ancient priestesses nor Don Sebastian had anticipated. The wars of independence had created a climate of spiritual and political unrest, a surge of terror, despair, and intensified religious fervor. And these emotions were exactly the kind of energy the Mother of the Depths fed upon. On December 8, 1809, just 4 days before the mass disappearance, an unexpected visitor arrived at the convent. His presence would change everything. He was Fray Tomás de Aguirre, a 67-year-old Franciscan who had spent his life specializing in the detection of syncretic heresies across hundreds of convents in New Spain. Fray Tomás had traced a disturbing pattern. For 122 years, every 7 years, a nun from this convent had allegedly departed for missions in Spain. Yet shipping records showed no passages booked, and Spanish convents had never received them. Even more unsettling, all of the disappearances aligned with December, coinciding with astronomical alignments linked to pre-Hispanic ritual calendars. In his first days at the convent, Fray Tomás observed anomalies that filled him with dread. The prayers had subtle but undeniable alterations, Latin phrases interwoven with guttural sounds belonging to no European language, rhythms that matched astronomical patterns more than Christian hymnody. The 15 nuns moved with unnatural synchronization. When one rose, the others followed 3 seconds later, like marionettes guided by an invisible hand. They seemed to share knowledge impossibly. When he asked one nun a question, another would often answer, even if she had not been present. On the 3rd day, Fray Tomás made the decision that would seal his fate. He resolved to explore the underground chambers whose existence he had already deduced. In the early hours of December 11th, he discovered a hidden stairway behind the main altar. The spiral staircase descended for more than 100 meters, carved with inhuman precision into the living rock. Its walls were covered in inscriptions blending ancient pre-Hispanic symbols with modifications added during the convent's 122 years of existence. At its end lay a perfect circular chamber, exactly 13 meters in diameter. At its center stood a black obsidian altar, surrounded by 13 niches. 12 niches held the perfectly preserved bodies of the vanished nuns, dressed in modified habits decorated with symbols foreign to Christian iconography. The 13th niche was newly prepared, adorned with fresh flowers and a folded habit awaiting its future occupant. On the central altar lay the mummified body of a young woman, not a nun, but something far older, the last high priestess of the original pre-Hispanic cult. Her eyes were open, and they followed the friar's movements with a malicious intelligence. And when he approached, her withered lips moved, forming words in a language older than any human tongue. Fray Tomás documented what he saw with trembling clarity. The chamber was not simply a tomb. It was a spiritual machine, carefully designed to channel scattered energies into a single focus. The 12 preserved bodies were not corpses, but active components of a system that had been accumulating power for 122 years. At its heart, the central figure, the mummified high priestess, served as the anchor, the original vessel through which the entity had begun manifesting in our world. The truth struck him with horror. The entity known as Our Lady of Sorrows was not a saint, nor a vision of the Virgin Mary, as some might have believed. It was a being from a parallel plane of existence, one that fed upon intense religious devotion. The convent had been nothing more than a farm, cultivating that energy. Periodically, the most devout nuns were not taken by God but rather transformed into extensions of the entity's consciousness. But the most chilling realization of all was this: the process was now reaching its end. The previous 12 cycles had been mere preparations. The 13th cycle would not involve just one nun, it demanded the fusion of all 15 sisters into a single collective entity, granting the Mother of the Depths permanent existence in our world. The astronomical inscriptions carved into the walls confirmed it. The required alignment would occur at midnight, December 12, 1809. When Fray Tomás climbed back to the surface, the nuns were already waiting in the cloister. They did not seem surprised. They only observed him with serene expectation. "You know the truth now, Brother Tomás," said Mother Maria Esperanza with a smile that never reached her eyes. "The gate will open tonight. And nothing you do can stop it." It was then he realized with terror that he no longer controlled his own actions. His arrival at the convent had not been coincidence, it had been orchestrated by the entity itself. The final ritual required an external witness, a human mind to serve as a bridge between the mortal world and the reality about to emerge. And as the bells began to strike midnight, Fray Tomás understood the most dreadful truth of all: he had just become the final component of a plan prepared for over a century. Midnight, December 12, 1809. It began with a thunderstorm that defied all logic. The lightning did not spread across the skies at random, it formed a perfect circle, 13 kilometers wide, centered directly on the convent. Beyond that perimeter, the night remained clear and starry. But inside, bolts of lightning fell in mechanical rhythm, always striking the same place, the chapel dome, again and again, with a precision that suggested deliberate intelligence. The villagers nearby reported inhuman sounds, low guttural groans, as if the earth itself were crying out, mixed with chanting in a language no one could identify. Inside the convent, Fray Tomás found himself in a state of mental paralysis. His mind remained clear, clearer than ever, but he had lost all control of his body. He was now only a spectator within himself. The 15 nuns arranged themselves in a geometric formation they had clearly rehearsed. They did not speak, yet their movements were perfectly synchronized, like a choreography memorized not just in mind, but in flesh. At 11:45, the walls of the convent began to breathe. The stone expanded and contracted rhythmically, as if the entire building were a single colossal living organism. At 11:50, the procession moved toward the main chapel. The altar had been transformed. The silver cross was gone, replaced by a structure of liquid obsidian, holding a solid shape but constantly shifting before the eyes. Torn-out pages from holy books surrounded it on the floor, arranged in hypnotic fractal patterns. And from below, something began to rise, a presence that distorted space itself as it ascended. The nuns took their positions. But they were no longer entirely human. Their bodies shifted in impossible ways. Limbs lengthening at unnatural angles. Faces losing their individual features. Voices producing sounds no human throat could create. At 11:58, the entity itself began to manifest. It had no fixed form, only a shifting confluence of impossible geometries, patterns that hinted at vast intelligence, but one utterly alien to mankind. And then Fray Tomás grasped the final, terrible truth. He was the bridge. His mind, still human, still rational, was the missing piece that would connect this reality to the one emerging. What was happening here was not the end of a story. It was the beginning, the first event in a process that would gradually transform the very nature of human reality. Exactly at midnight, reality itself began to fracture. It was not a dramatic explosion, but a subtle, irreversible shift in the very fabric of space and time. To Fray Tomás, it felt like an endless fall, as though the ground had opened beneath him into dimensions without name. The 15 nuns, who had been chanting in that impossible tongue, suddenly fell silent. But the silence was not an absence of sound, it was the presence of something beyond sound itself. Then the transformation began. Their bodies started to reorganize at the molecular level, stretching and reshaping into geometries no earthly life form could possess. Yet the symmetry was flawless, so hypnotically beautiful it was also utterly terrifying. Sister Paloma was the first to complete the process. Her human form melted like wax, reforming into a shape that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. To look at her was like staring through a prism that refracted not light, but reality itself. The others soon followed, each transforming into beings that retained faint vestiges of humanity but were now arranged according to the principles of a mathematics far beyond human understanding. And yet, despite their new forms, their consciousness remained intact. In the eyes of these altered creatures burned an intelligence still recognizably human, but expanded, reaching far beyond the limits of normal perception. Mother Maria Esperanza drifted toward Fray Tomás. Her movements no longer obeyed the laws of locomotion. She simply slid through space, as though gravity and distance had no hold on her. Her voice did not come through her lips, it arrived directly in his mind, layered in multiple tones at once. Now you understand, Brother Tomás. What you have witnessed is not the corruption of Christian faith, but its natural evolution. We have found the path to a deeper communion with the divine. Fray Tomás tried to respond, but his body no longer obeyed him. His mind remained sharp, painfully so, but he could not form words. Your role is different, Esperanza continued, reading his thoughts. We are the anchors that stabilize this expanding reality. But you will be the witness, the bearer of memory. In that moment, he realized his fate, he would not be fully transformed like the others. Instead, He would be altered just enough to survive in this new reality, while still retaining his humanity, so that he might carry the memory of what had occurred. Because the entity's plan did not end with this night. This ritual was only the first step, the gradual transformation of all New Spain, and eventually the entire world, into a new existence that fused human nature with the principles of parallel realities. When the central entity finally manifested in physical form, Fray Tomás understood why he had been chosen. His deep knowledge of the Church's structures made him the perfect agent, a vessel through which the new faith could be spread discreetly. The entity did not appear as a single figure. It was a shifting confluence of geometries, shapes that bent and unfolded, suggesting a vast intelligence organized according to principles far beyond human logic. When it spoke, there was no sound. Instead, concepts flooded directly into Fray Tomás's mind, whole systems of understanding delivered in an instant. He received the full scope of the plan. The convent was only the first node in a much larger network. Across the Christian world, other centers would arise, hidden beneath monasteries, cathedrals, and convents, each acting as a disguised hub of transformation. The Church's hierarchy itself would serve as camouflage, enabling the entity's influence to grow undetected. The process would take centuries, but once it reached a critical mass, it would be irreversible. And Fray Tomás, with his reports on heresies, would provide exactly the documentation needed to guide the expansion, without arousing the suspicion of the Inquisition. When dawn finally came, Fray Tomás found himself alone in the transformed chapel. The walls were no longer solid stone. They had become translucent, revealing structures stretching outward into dimensions alien to ordinary space. The nuns were gone, yet not gone. They had assumed new positions, no longer visible in the human spectrum but perceptible as subtle distortions in the air, like ripples in unseen water. He realized he had just witnessed the birth of a new collective life form, an entity that existed both as separate individuals and as a unified organism, operating in our world and in planes inaccessible to normal human perception. His true work had only just begun. On the afternoon of December 13, 1809, Captain Fernando Ruiz de Alarcón and his detachment of colonial soldiers arrived at the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows. What they found defied every rational explanation, and would be buried by the authorities for the next 2 centuries. The convent was completely empty. There was no sign of the 15 nuns who had lived there for decades. No evidence of a struggle, no trace of violence, no plunder. Each cell was immaculate, the habits of the nuns neatly folded on every bed, as if each sister had carefully undressed before vanishing. Personal belongings were in place. Religious art was untouched. Even the food in the kitchen was fresh, as though prepared that very morning. But then came the disturbing details. The stone walls of the convent were now covered in symbols that had never been there before. They looked freshly carved, yet with a precision and depth that would have taken months of specialized work. More terrifying still, the symbols seemed to shift when not directly observed. Soldiers reported that when they looked at a wall, the symbols appeared fixed in a certain pattern. But when they looked away and then back, the configuration had subtly changed. Captain Alarcón, a veteran of countless campaigns, who had faced indigenous rebellions, bandits, and civil unrest without losing composure, found himself unsettled by the oppressive atmosphere. It was as if unseen entities were watching every move. The search revealed more anomalies. In the library, dozens of books had been opened to specific pages and arranged in complex geometric patterns across the marble floor. When soldiers tried to read them, the texts shifted before their eyes, morphing into unfamiliar languages. In the chapel, the main altar had been completely reorganized. The silver cross was gone, not stolen, but as though it had never existed. In its place stood an arrangement of candles and flowers forming a pattern so hypnotically beautiful that some soldiers lost track of time staring at it, regaining awareness with no memory of the hours that had passed. The most disturbing discovery came when they finally uncovered the underground chambers, which did not appear on any official architectural plan. They found stairways descending into impossible depths, corridors stretching far beyond the convent's geographical boundaries, and circular chambers filled with artifacts that matched no known culture. And in the deepest chamber, they found him, Fray Tomás de Aguirre. He was alive, but he was no longer the same man. Fray Tomás was alive, but profoundly altered by what he had witnessed the night before. His once dark hair had turned completely white. His eyes now shimmered with a faint greenish hue, reflecting light in an unnatural way. And when he spoke, his voice carried an echoing resonance, as though more than one tone spoke at once. Yet he was coherent, frighteningly coherent. He could recall every detail with supernatural precision. But what disturbed the soldiers most was not his appearance, it was his understanding. Fray Tomás spoke of parallel dimensions as though he had traveled through them himself. He described entities that existed partially in our world and partially in inaccessible planes of reality. He even demonstrated knowledge of mathematics and astronomy far beyond his Franciscan education. Captain Alarcón filed a report, but the authorities classified it immediately as top secret. Both civil and ecclesiastical officials convened in emergency sessions, realizing this was a crisis that defied every institutional category. The decision was swift and absolute. They implemented what official documents later called the Protocol of Absolute Silence. All records related to the Convent of Our Lady of Sorrows were confiscated and locked away in secret archives. The soldiers who had been present were reassigned to distant garrisons across New Spain, under strict orders never to speak of what they had seen. And an official version of the events was written, one that would endure for 2 centuries. According to this sanctioned narrative, the convent had been attacked by radical insurgents linked to the growing independence movements. The nuns had been kidnapped and likely murdered, though their bodies were never found. The convent was said to have been looted and later burned to cover up the crime. This explanation served its purpose. It justified harsher repression against the rebels. It explained the disappearance of the nuns without stirring panic among the faithful. And it provided a neat conclusion that required no further investigation. But the classified documents told a very different story. Not only did the authorities know the official explanation was false, they had identified the true nature of what occurred and had begun secretly monitoring for similar manifestations elsewhere. As for Fray Tomás de Aguirre, he was confined to the monastery of San Miguel de Allende, under the pretense of suffering a mental collapse from witnessing the supposed massacre of the nuns. Officially, he spent his final years writing theological treatises on defending Catholic orthodoxy. But his real writings, now preserved in the Vatican's secret archives, revealed something entirely different. For the 13 years he lived after the events, Fray Tomás produced not only a detailed chronicle of what he had witnessed, but also a comprehensive theory of reality itself, anticipating scientific discoveries that would not emerge until the 20th century. He wrote of parallel realities, extra-spatial dimensions, and forms of consciousness existing independently of biology. And these were not abstract speculations. They were direct descriptions of phenomena he had observed. But Fray Tomás did not limit himself to documenting what he had witnessed. During his years of confinement in San Miguel de Allende, he quietly established a secret network of correspondence across convents and monasteries throughout the Catholic world. Under the guise of theological exchange, he sent carefully coded letters, asking discreet questions and requesting descriptions of unusual manifestations. What he uncovered was deeply unsettling, a global pattern, extending across centuries of religious history. There were cases of monastic communities that gradually adopted heterodox practices. There were reports of monks and nuns acquiring inexplicable knowledge, far beyond their education. And there were records of entire communities vanishing in a single night, leaving behind only cryptic symbols and artifacts that defied rational explanation. The parallels to Guanajuato were undeniable. Every disappearance followed the same basic cycle. Every site contained subterranean chambers with objects resembling those Fray Tomás had seen under the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows. And every incident suggested that what had happened in Mexico was not an isolated occurrence, but part of something vast and interconnected. In his final writings, completed only days before his death in 1822, Fray Tomás made a prophetic declaration. What I witnessed in the Convent of Sorrows was not the end of a tragedy, but the beginning of a transformation. The influence I observed will continue to spread, touching more and more communities. Each transformation strengthens the network, preparing the way for manifestations yet more dramatic. This process is not local, nor temporary. It is global. And it will not cease until the very nature of human reality has been altered. The Vatican's secret archives record that his prediction proved disturbingly accurate. By the decades that followed, similar disappearances were reported. Spain, 1834. Ireland, 1847. Poland, 1863. Mexico again, 1888. Each followed the same terrifying pattern. And in each case, investigators later discovered hidden chambers, artifacts of unknown origin, and evidence of a force that transcended all human categories. The accuracy of Fray Tomás's prophecy became evident in the decades that followed. The Vatican's classified reports documented further incidents across Europe and the Americas. Each followed the same dreadful sequence. A devout religious community, apparently orthodox, began to exhibit subtle deviations. Unexplained knowledge emerged. And then, one night, they disappeared entirely, leaving behind only carved symbols and artifacts beyond comprehension. But what bound all these cases together was a chilling detail. Every location where these transformations occurred contained hidden underground chambers. And within them lay objects of the same impossible nature as those found beneath the convent in Guanajuato. By the late 19th century, secular authorities had also begun to encounter the phenomenon. In 1887, during the construction of a new road near Guanajuato, 3 workers vanished without a trace. All that remained were their tools, and strange circular markings carved into the stone with human fingernails. Excavation soon revealed that the subterranean chambers of the convent remained intact. And the artifacts inside still radiated measurable effects. Scientists of the era recorded anomalies that defied known physics. Electromagnetic fields that pulsed in rhythmic patterns. Sudden temperature fluctuations. Gravitational shifts cycling with astronomical calendars identical to those engraved on the chamber walls. The Mexican government immediately classified the site as a matter of national security. Officially, they cited archaeological preservation. But behind closed doors, they knew the truth was far more dangerous. Throughout the 20th century, the site was monitored continuously by agencies using the most advanced instruments of their age. Though results remained classified, occasional leaks confirmed the worst fears. Every December 12, at exactly midnight, seismographs registered rhythmic tremors deep beneath the old convent. Meteorologists recorded circular storms forming directly over the site, storms with characteristics not found in natural weather. and radio astronomers detected electromagnetic emissions aimed precisely at constellations corresponding to the ancient maps inscribed on the chamber walls. In 1987, a team from the National Autonomous University of Mexico received limited permission to conduct a scientific study. Their report was instantly classified. But partial leaks describe what they found. Construction materials that existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Inscriptions on the walls that shifted configuration when unobserved. Interior geometry that did not obey Euclidean laws. Most disturbing of all, their instruments recorded biological activity within the chambers, yet no living organisms were visible. Heat signatures, oxygen consumption, and electromagnetic emissions indicated that something alive persisted inside. Something that operated by principles entirely foreign to terrestrial biology. And the researchers themselves suffered lingering after-effects. For weeks after leaving the site, they reported vivid dreams of landscapes not of this world. Visions of crystalline figures moving in procession. And sudden, intuitive understanding of advanced mathematical concepts they had never studied. One of them, Dr. Carlos Mendoza, wrote in his personal journal. It is as if the chambers are an interface, a threshold between our reality and something vastly different. I no longer believe the nuns died or disappeared in any conventional sense. I believe they were transformed, existing now partly in our world, and partly elsewhere. Over the last 2 centuries, reports have continued to emerge from the mountains of Guanajuato. Local villagers whisper of hooded figures that appear on moonless nights, walking along forgotten paths that no longer exist on modern maps, but that align perfectly with the routes of the old convent. Witnesses say the figures always follow the same pattern. At exactly midnight on December 12th, they move in silent procession toward the ruins of the convent's chapel, and then vanish. Those who have seen them agree on unsettling details. The figures cast no shadows. Their steps make no sound. And their forms shimmer like liquid crystal, solid yet translucent. Authorities dismiss these stories as folklore. But classified records suggest otherwise. For 214 years, seismographs in the region have registered rhythmic tremors at midnight every December 12th, emanating precisely from the depths where the convent's chambers lie. Meteorologists consistently record storm formations of impossible geometry, perfect circular tempests centered above the ruins, vanishing without a trace after 1 hour. And radio telescopes capture emissions of energy aimed at specific constellations, matching exactly the ancient star maps etched into the obsidian altar centuries ago. The theory that emerges from all this evidence is disturbing in its simplicity. The nuns never truly disappeared. They were transformed into something that exists simultaneously across multiple planes of reality. They serve as anchors, keeping a doorway open, one that links our world to something beyond comprehension. If that is true, then what Fray Tomás witnessed in 1809 was not a conclusion. It was a beginning. Each passing year strengthens the network. Each tremor is not a memory, but a heartbeat. Something beneath the mountain is still alive, and still growing. And the question that haunts the few officials who know the full truth is terrifyingly simple. How much more power must it gather before it completes what began on that December night in 1809? This mystery reveals a truth that institutions have feared for more than 2 centuries. Some secrets are so profound, so destabilizing, that governments and the church alike have chosen silence rather than confrontation. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows officially vanished from history in 1809. But the evidence, classified documents, recurring anomalies, and the testimonies of those who dared to investigate, suggests otherwise. The transformations did not end with the 15 nuns. They were merely the first step in a process still unfolding, a design that spans centuries. Every December 12th, the signs return. The tremors. The storms. The spectral figures in procession. All pointing to a single conclusion. What Fray Tomás witnessed was not an isolated event, but the opening of a gateway that has never been closed. And the most unsettling question of all remains unanswered. How long before the process completes itself? How long before what began in Guanajuato extends beyond the mountains, beyond Mexico, and reshapes the very fabric of human reality? The authorities may continue to bury the truth in secret archives. They may dismiss the witnesses as delusional. But the mountain still pulses with its hidden heartbeat. And each year, as midnight strikes on December 12th, the threshold stirs once more. Some believe it is only a matter of time.